Good afternoon. Thank y'all for coming out today. I'm Shelley Ritter, the director of the Delta Blues Museum.
And I'm going to give her a hug because I've known her a long time.
Oh, thanks. And we're very excited to present Robert Gordon speaking on Muddy Waters today. April is Muddy Waters Month, and we've been celebrating it all month. This is our third series in our From the Archives program, which is sponsored by the Mississippi Humanities Council and Atmos Energy and Friends of the Delta Blues Museum. Muddy Waters Month has also been co-sponsored by Covenant Bank and the Shack Up Inn. Because this is a Mississippi Humanities program, they would like me to share this language with you. The Mississippi Humanities Council is an independent, nonpartisan, non-political organization funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities and private donations. The Council's primary objective is to shed light, not heat, on the public policy issues of today by examining the larger value questions involved through the use of philosophy, literature, history, and other disciplines in the humanities. Now, Robert, as many of you know, wrote the biography of Muddy Waters, Can't Be Satisfied. He also found the manuscript that Fisk did when they were here in Cahoma County while he was working on that book, which resulted in a book called Lost Delta Found. He's an expert on blues, on Memphis music, and many other things. And without further ado, it's with great pleasure I bring you Robert Gordon.
Thank you. I hesitate. I am not an expert on anything. Let me just get that out up front. But I'm happy to be here. And I had a few different thoughts about ways to approach this. And I don't know. I feel like I might just throw them all out and do something else instead. But I wanted to make a couple points up front. This is April 2013, and it's, depending on how you count, either the 100th or the 98th birthday month of Muddy Waters. For a long time, he was thought to have been born in 1915, but it was one of those research discoveries I made while working on the biography of Muddy Waters that it seemed likely he was actually born in 1913, and I kind of groaned when I learned that. I was like, oh no, you don't want those little controversies. There's, the 2 years isn't really, they weren't. It was funny. I think he shaved the 2 years when he got to Chicago because he wanted to be younger for going out for singing in clubs. But it was like, come on, Muddy, 2 years, he might as well have done 5, But Muddy, I think, was kind of, even though he was royal, he was also modest, and he didn't want to shave too much off. But recent census, I guess the 1940 census has been available now since the book was written. They come available every 10 years, and it supports the 1913 date. So I'm really not taking a side, but I would like to say happy 100th birthday to Muddy Waters. And I was as interested in talking about how how much Mississippi has changed in the 100 years since Muddy was born, as I was really talking about Muddy himself. Although I wanted to read a little bit from here in honor of the cabin, which they keep in the back. In the new back, yes. Shelley took me on a tour. I remember seeing this when it was in drawings and early fundraising stages, and it is really a thrill. My heart was racing as we went through there. It's a beautiful addition, and it's great stuff. And the car is just a great idea. And Shelley says they have the Presto recorder that Lomax used. The car is the same model. You'll have to refresh my memory. 1939 Ford green too. I remember Honey Boy Edwards always talked about it being being green. Pulled up and well, that's how Muddy. In fact, that's the section I was going to read because she's got the car and she's got the cabin, so it made sense to do that. But and maybe it'll make sense to read first. But let me lay out a couple other agenda items since the meeting's been called to order. I wanted to talk about what changes had happened, and I would love to. I'm seeing an old friend here today, an old acquaintance who is knows a lot of. I learned a lot from in a short amount of time, and I would like to put him on the spot and ask him some questions. Let me introduce from the Stovall Farm, which is the farm that historically Muddy came from, Pete Hunter, who's the farm manager now and was a resource to me both in the book and the documentary we made about Muddy Waters. So, Pete, I am thrilled to see you, and thank you for being here. And start to think I'm going to put you on the spot. Yeah. What should I read first?
Sure.
Oh, okay, because it's exciting to see the cabin in the car. So this is just the very beginning of the book, and it's well, it's in a way it's the moment when things changed for Muddy. This book was a lot of fun to write too. It was really hard because Muddy was deceased, and because there wasn't a treasure trove, there wasn't like some big file of written data waiting for me to discover. Muddy couldn't really write, so there was no, he had no archive of letters or anything. So it was really an oral history pursuit, and that made it both a great adventure because I had to go find all these people, who were involved in the story. But it also made it really hard because, because stories conflicted, and so it made the question of the truth a very pliable subject. And the way I handled that was just to lay that out, to say that, I'm not sure what happened here. Jimmy Rogers says this and little Walter says that, and the ramifications of one or the other, you can follow them out. But to lay open what the different versions were rather than to try to state what was. Y'all come on in, no problem. We won't interrupt you. Have a seat if you'd like. Yeah, okay. You might want to take notes for the pop quiz that's going to come up. All right.
John Lee Hooker played every Saturday in Juke in Chicago,
Maxwell Street, yeah, man.
And we can talk.
That sounds good. Okay. All right. I'll study for the pop quiz. Well, let me just read this bit. It's about 3 pages, so bear with me. It's not too bad. Muddy Waters was, by the way, can everybody hear me okay? We're good there? Muddy Waters was barefoot when he got word a white man was looking for him. It was Sunday, the last day of August, 1941. The cotton had bloomed and was set, the crop as it would be until picked in about a month. Muddy, like the other blacks who farmed a piece of someone else's land in Mississippi, was enjoying his lay-by. Soon he'd be working that cotton from sun to sun. Word reached Muddy before the white man did. Uh-oh, this is it, Muddy remembered thinking. They done found out I'm selling whiskey. He went to neutral ground, the plantation commissary. The plantation commissary, away from his home where his hooch. He went to the plantation commissary, away from his home where his hooch was hid. The white man found him there. I went there. I said, "Yassa." He said, "Hey, don't yassa me. Say no and yes to me." This is Muddy speaking. He said, "I've been looking for you." I said, "For what?" "I want you to play something for me. Where's your guitar at?" I say, "It's down in my house. Come on, get it. I want you to play for me." The white man's name was Alan Lomax. He was 26 years old. Muddy was 28. I couldn't figure it out when he first got there, Muddy said. I didn't know whether he was one of them smart police coming after me or what the heck was going on. I couldn't handle this white man going to put me in his car and drive me around, going into my house. I say, revenue man trying to get into me. But it was hard to peg this Lomax character. His accent was strange. That's the end of the quote. But it was hard to peg this Lomax character. His accent was strange. Texas, but watered down by Washington. And he had a strange manner. He asked Muddy for some water and then astonished the Mississippian by sharing. Same cup I drink out of? He drinks out of that too. I said, not a white man doing this. No, this was too much. He going too far. But my mind's still thinking, oh, he'd do anything to see can he bust you. Then, hovering in the background, accompanying Lomax, but kept at arm's length, was the man who initiated the historic expedition, John Work III, a black man. Work mostly stayed quiet. In the Deep South, he would be perceived as nothing more than Lomax's flunky, and Lomax did little to counter such a perception. Work's presence intensified Muddy's suspicion, as did the absence of Captain Holt, the Stovall plantation overseer. Plantations did not take kindly to agitators of any sort coming on their land, and anyone not a resident and not known was an agitator until his presence was explained. The same grapevine that warned Muddy he was wanted would have first reached Captain Holt. Muddy was well liked on Stovall, both by the tenant farmers and by the Stovall family. Whenever revenue agents had previously come around, Colonel Stovall himself had come to warn Muddy. If he were carted off, the hands would be losing not only one of their bootleggers, but also their most popular musician. But Holt's absence meant this revenuer's visit was approved, and Muddy realized the farm was sacrificing him to the government, a pawn between two kings. He was a peculiar revenue agent, this white man. Instead of extracting a badge, Lomax went to his car, pulled out a Martin guitar, and began to pick some blues. Muddy could see now what he'd only glimpsed before. The entire back seat and most of the trunk were occupied by a recording machine, a disc cutter, and a generator that converted the automobile's DC current to AC. The recording device also had a playback arm, allowing Lomax to share what he'd been given before taking it away. He brought this machine, said Muddy, and he got his old guitar and he started playing, and he said, I heard Robert Johnson's dead, and I heard you's just as good, and I want you to do something for me. Will you let me record some of your songs and I'll play them back and let you listen to them? I want to take it to the Library of Congress. I didn't know what did he mean by the Library of Congress. But enough was adding up. This stranger's interest was music and not whiskey stills. Word about the turn of events quickly reached Son Sims, Muddy's musical partner, and instead of keeping far from there, he now hurried to Muddy's house, guitar in hand. We got his stuff out of the trunk of the car, says Muddy, and all his long batteries, and set them up on my front porch, and I was in my front room with my guitar, my little microphone, and he ground his wire down through the window and he went to work. The discs were thick slabs of glass. Metals were conserved for military use during World War II, sprayed with a black acetate coating into which a lathe cut grooves that captured the sound transmitted through the microphones. These discs were 16 inches across. The standard LP is 12 inches and a 78 is 10 inches, so these were unlike anything Muddy had seen on a jukebox or in a store. Their imposing size underscored the importance of the event. The fellowship was christened and the distrust dismissed with a toast. The whiskey warm in everyone's belly. Muddy's first recording session began. So I just went along and made that country blues, said Muddy. When he played back the first song, I sound just like anybody's records. Man, you don't know how I felt that afternoon when I heard that voice, and it was my own voice. I thought, man, I can sing. Later on, he sent me 2 copies of the pressing and a check for $20, and I carried that record up the corner and put it on the jukebox. Just played it and said, I can do it. I can do it. So I think there's a lot packed into that little moment, including a lot I learned from you. But it's that meeting of technology where Muddy can hear himself be something he'd only ever been able to imagine he could be. It's this technological, and Muddy had this entrepreneurial spirit. Muddy drove a car. Muddy had a car when other people didn't have a car, and he made extra money by giving people rides from the farm to places nearby as they needed. Someone told me that they would fill the flat tires. They would fill the tires with cottonseed so that so they wouldn't pop. And that way it was just some kind of cushion. It was not quite air, but it was not quite not air either. And on the roads, I'm sure it, did just fine. And Muddy would drive that and give people rides. But I love that moment where the record player affirms for Muddy that he can make records, and that's because technology is going to be a central part of Muddy's story. What happens here in Clarksdale with the invention, the invention and increasing use of the mechanical harvester is that people are going to lose their jobs because they're not needed to pick the cotton anymore, and they're going to move away to get factory jobs in the north. And this culture from Mississippi is transplanted to Chicago. And when Muddy goes up there, he, with this forward-thinking attitude that really defines his whole life, he embraces the electric guitar, and that first version in Chicago of Can't Be Satisfied, which he had also recorded down here and put on the machine in the jukebox near Stovall. It's the same song, but now translated to a new electrical, mechanical world, and it's juiced. It's just the old style, given this sound that can translate in Chicago. So technology and Muddy are going to be long intertwined. A few thoughts on the changes in Mississippi, and then I want to open it up for questions because I'd really much rather talk about what you'd rather hear about. In honor of Muddy's 100th birthday, the book was republished recently, in April actually, earlier this month in England. And so I wrote a new introduction, and as I was preparing my thoughts today, I was thinking, really, it's this stuff, so I'm going to refer to here. I'm a big fan of the Mississippi Blues Trail, and I make films for the Mississippi Blues Trail. But I love what it emblematizes about the government's change in attitude. I mean, I think political, civil, civic embrace of something that was once shunned, to see it happen in our lifetimes is a really incredible thing. And to look into the future for a second when everything else is gone, when jobs are gone, when whatever, everything's away, the thing that Clarksdale, for example, will always have that you can't take away from here is its history of what happened here. And a lot of that is musical, and a lot of that is African American. And so it's and so what, in the well into the 70s, and there's cases to be made that it's later, but you had institutionalized racism. I'm not telling anybody here anything they don't know. I just marvel at the change in society it's been decades, but to have lived, to have seen it gives you hope that, it gives you hope. So the Mississippi Blues Trail, there's talk of a Freedom Riders Trail. there's this, Delta Blues Museum. There's the Bridging the Blues Festival connecting Leland and the Helena Festival, and also Beale Street. And I think that's a great sign to see, because of funding these man-imposed state borders get in the way sometimes, because this culture that is from here spreads, well into Memphis and environs in Tennessee and across the Mississippi to Arkansas. This alluvial plain, the floodlands and the farming area, this all fed one culture, funneling upstream to Memphis and downstream to New Orleans. So I like to see things where the state governments are throwing their lots together to create things like this Bridging the Blues Festival, which began last year and I think will grow over the next few years. Well, there's some general thoughts to toss out there. I really am much more interested in taking your questions, so I hope you will ask some. What would anybody like to know? Was there anything advertised that I was supposed to speak about that I haven't?
No, but you did use our...
Yes, the archive. Okay. In the research, you're looking for information wherever you can get it when your files are, when it's largely an oral history. So things like the newspapers are always great. And so any archives like the one here at the Blues Museum, they're also helpful. Also, I'm reminded as photo resources too. I mean, so yeah, the Blues Archive here and the Muddy File was great, and the museum itself as a facility. I love to send people here because otherwise they may get off the airplane from anywhere in the world in Memphis and get in an air-conditioned car and get out and go to into an air-conditioned museum and get back and eat in an air-conditioned hotel restaurant and then get back in the airplane. And by getting down to here, it means you're really, even if you don't open your windows, you're getting into it. By driving down here, you feel I think you begin to experience something different, and you begin to understand so much more about the music and where the music came from. In that introduction, it's not just it's not just musical. There's a farm, there's social hierarchies, there's the roads and everything. You just experience all that when you come down here. So again, I know we all take for granted the things in our own hometown, but you've got gems and they're great. Come on now, ask me some questions, somebody.
Well, given that there was no written record that Muddy Waters left behind in the line of letters or diaries, in the course of writing the book, did you seek out James Cotton or, say, Marshall Chess?
Right. So the question is, without the written diaries...
Is Jimmy Rogers still alive?
He was. Where do you get your information from? And yes, that's what I meant. You have to go find the people who were there. All the people you mentioned I spoke to.
Do you know Jerry Portnoy?
Jerry Portnoy. I spoke to Jerry Portnoy, the harmonica player who was with Muddy toward the end. And Jimmy Rogers, Muddy's guitarist. Great photo of the Zanzibar Muddy Waters band with Jimmy and Otis back there on the wall. It's an interesting conflict from the researching point of view in situations like this, where I'm interviewing people who are getting up in age, because you're always worried about their more mortality. Somebody like Jimmy Rogers, you know, who was, I guess, I mean, I don't remember how old he was, in his 70s, I think. So, you know, what does that mean anymore? You don't know. You know, how healthy are they? They look fine, but you want to get to them as soon as you can, but you don't want to get to them before you can get from them what you need to get from them. You have to do the research before you get there, right? You have to know a lot of information so you can get more information, especially because if you go, that lets you go back yet again if you need to. If you get there and you don't know anything, people don't really want to talk to you anymore. So with Jimmy, it was a great experience through a writer in Chicago who spent some time around here a lot, Dick Sherman. He got me to Jimmy's house, and I had waited years. I was probably 3 years into the work, and was prepared, man. I was prepared, and I started asking Jimmy, you know, deep questions, trying to figure out about Muddy's grandmother who had raised him and who was really close, and where Muddy was when she died and what his reaction was and what the consequences were, because Jimmy knew Muddy at that time. And we sat around drinking, VSOP, and had a nice evening getting lots of information. And not long after, like, I mean, a matter of a few weeks, he was diagnosed with his cancer, and not long after that he was dead. So it's a roll of the dice always, you know, and something like that happens and it gives you a whip. I'm just finishing a book about Stax records, and it's that same kind of feeling of having to know your information, when to go to people, you know, and it's always a risk. There's always this press, you know, this foot on your neck. You got to do it now, and there's no let up to it until you deliver the book.
So you feel invasive then at times?
Do I feel invasive doing the interviews? I did my first book was also interview heavy, called It Came From Memphis. And I don't think I ever really felt invasive there, in part because I was working in my hometown, and in part because, well, it was just everybody was having fun telling these stories. And it was largely the same with Muddy in terms of the response, but I felt invasive because I don't know why. I thought about it a lot. Going to people who I knew less or my recommendations, the way you get to people a lot of times is through a mutual friend. And so everything was more tenuous because there was so much Chicago-based stuff and places all around, not so much in Mississippi. It was always easier to go back, you know, because once I was there, I was always informed, and people liked my questions and were interested to hear if I was coming back, it was an interesting conversation they wanted to have. But boy, it's a lot of pressure all the time. Yes.
Concerning the music, what would you say Muddy Waters was a musical innovator at? And second, what would you say his musical legacy is?
Two big questions. One big one and one giant one. He asked, in terms of Muddy's music, what were his innovations? How would I describe him as an innovator? And what's his legacy? And I mean, Muddy was not the first blues artist to play an electric guitar. You know, Muddy was not the first. You know, this notion of first, I think, gets confused sometimes. Well, and so I don't think of that so much as the innovation. You know, the innovation was that Muddy could roll with the times, and so when his environment changed, he didn't fear the change and grabbed the new technology presented to him and made it work. So that's an innovation, to take what we might term country blues and electrify it. When he'd been playing it, there'd been nothing. If he'd had an electric guitar, he couldn't plug it into anything. There was no electricity in the joints, you know. So he embraced all that, which is a great thing. I mean, he's coming from a place where in the Delta, in the, early part of the 20th century, there was a place that he was supposed to be in, and he was reminded everywhere he went, all the time, in every way, about that. So the fact that he could live here for 30 years, because by the time he moves to Chicago, he's 30. So he lives here 30 years and keeps an open mind. I mean, it's a strength as well. So I don't know. I've kind of dodged the innovation question, but there's a way to think about it. Okay, I get. And then, what is his legacy? In a way, I think before you leave, go back to the new room, the very far back, and on the left, when you're entering, is a black and white shot of a band, and Muddy's on one side with the guitar and he's leaning in, and Jimmy Rogers is on the other side with the guitar leaning in, so you'll know the shot, and there's I think 5 guys in it, and in a way what he's done there is he's created the template for rock and roll, both in musicians and in musical style. He's got these 2 guitars, he's got a piano, he's got a drum and a harmonica, and he has amped up this blues to rock and roll, basically. I mean, it is, then you get into these weird, how do you define what? But it is, in that, it's not Rocket 88, but it's Hoochie Coochie Man. That's the other thing Muddy did, was he really sexed it up. He was not, which was not uncommon, but as he got bigger, that was part of his act. And so he always had a great live show because he was such a dynamic. I saw him a number of times as a kid growing up, and well into college and after. I guess he died right in '83 when I was finishing college, and I'd seen him in college a number of times as well as around here. Once on a bill with Earl Scruggs, interestingly, the banjo player. So, but he was a real charismatic. He was a powerful guy. He was a band leader, and carried that onto the stage, and was a banty in a way, a banty rooster. He was cocky on stage and very sexy. So it helped his sales and his audiences. Yes.
I don't think this was the first biography on Muddy Waters, so I was wondering what part of the story did you think was missing, and what did you sell to the publisher? What kind of story were you selling to the publisher?
The question is, this was not the first biography of Muddy Waters, so what was different, or what was I selling to the publisher? Well, to give you, a hint of how books work, I was, several years into this when I'd already sold the book, in advance before the other book came out, or I even knew about it. And so what I sold the publisher was, my telling of the Muddy Waters story. I want to tell this story. Here's what I'm good at. Here's how I see it. And selling books is a pain, and it hasn't gotten any easier. It was a pain then, it hasn't gotten any easier. And then when the Muddy book came out, I was fortunate that in a competitive way, I was fortunate it came out on a smaller press. And it was a book that seemed to rely more on she did a lot of interviews, the author did, and she used a lot of paper research, and I think that my sense of place that I could bring to it, and my sense of the history of what went on here was changed everything. So it deepened it. And actually, it's a similar question with the Stax book. There's been a book out, and it's very comprehensive. It's not a narrative per se. and so mine is going to be more of a narrative, and less. It's very different. There's lots of reasons for different people to write books on the same subject. Some subjects warrant it more than others, of course. But yeah, so it was no problem, and I just brought that. I brought my history to it from being immersed here. Born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. More questions? Yes, sir.
I'll say I was born and raised in Memphis too.
Said, oh, you were born and raised in Memphis too? How long you been down here?
I don't know. I don't live out here more than a trip.
Oh, you are? All right. Me too. Drove down today. Pete, I spent a day on the Stovall Farm with a video camera. Pete was just telling me that I surprised him in a way that, because it was it was a show for PBS, National PBS American Masters, and I guess Pete thought.
You didn't tell me that.
I told you that. I did too tell you that. Or maybe we hadn't sold it at that point, but that was our intention.
I would have turned my shirt wrong side out.
No, man, you were great. We all left out of there, so impressed by your command of the land around here and also the history. One thing that you made me keenly aware of was the change in driving around the roads here. I would see, dotted with sharecropper shacks, and you made me aware that those were like the few last stragglers, that they had been much more regular and close together along the roads, and it makes much more sense when you think of people working by hand on the fields.
At one time there would be, in a 3-mile stretch, there might be 60 or 70 houses.
60.
Along the road. I can remember just riding from the little town of Farrell over to the levee. When I was a little kid, I used to count them to be 65, exactly 65 houses. There's not a one there now.
Not a one. There were 65 houses between Farrell and the levee, and now there's none. Yeah, it's an unbelievable change. And wow, this can we talk about the casinos for a second? I don't know, if it's a tense political issue, let's just dwell on it for a moment. And then, but I wondered how they were perceived here, because it seems to me that is this okay to talk about?
Yeah.
That the positive of the jobs they bring and the money they bring from afar to here, and the donations they make back to the community, that there's also, it creates and deepens a poverty that's here, and that feels to me like more of a balance, that there's more joblessness, not less, because of the casinos. Is that a fair interpretation, or?
The thing that makes me sad about the casinos is that I see people in there spending their paychecks that don't need to be spending their paychecks.
That's what I mean. People are spending paychecks that they don't.
The people that go there for entertainment that can afford it are fine, but there's a lot of people go there that spend their paychecks that don't need to be there.
Yeah.
It becomes addictive.
Yeah. The addiction. Yeah.
Some people have linked it actually to the kind of death of the juke joint culture, because people would tend to go to the casinos because their entertainment's as opposed to go out and see a live show, see music or whatever.
Right. So the death that the casinos bring, the death of the juke joint culture, because
that's what people have argued to me.
Yeah,
it's not sure how you prove that necessarily.
Yeah, it's free to walk in, so that's always.
Free to walk in, you get free drinks.
That's always nice. Yeah.
And things have changed in the Delta too, because in the times, in my youth, there were only a few people, just like you mentioned about Muddy, had cars. I mean, a lot of tradition on a large farm is that on Saturday night that somebody would take the farm truck, big truck, and people would pack on that truck and go to town and go to the joints, and then the truck would come home after midnight.
Look, that's the cover of this other book, a book that grew out of the Muddy Waters research called Lost Delta Found. On the cover of it is just that photo, that truck, taking people in. And in some of these Blues Trail marker films I've made, which I encourage everyone, man, we've been making these great films. Go to the Blues Trail, search Mississippi Blues Trail and go to Video Archive or Film Department. I'm not sure what it's called. You'll see it on the website. And we've got films up there that are really great. And people talk about the drives to town and the draw of town and everything that town was on a Saturday that it was not, that they didn't experience during the week. Oh, yeah, great. There are some copies of Lost Delta Found out there. And, yeah, here's the truck. Out in front of the church right over here on Sunflower, is it?
4th Street.
4th Street, okay.
It's the First Baptist Church, and they just got a Mississippi historical marker a few months ago.
All right, here's an interesting article I would like to write, and I haven't quite thought this through yet. And it's changed with the headlines, you'll know what I mean. Tale of Two Cities. Greenwood and Greenville. Right? I mean, look at what industry did in Greenwood. And what's that? It's gone now. Yeah, well, that's the headline that has changed in the past, 6 weeks. What's the effect going to be? Right? Because it is a beautiful demonstration of resuscitating a town. And I look at Greenville and think of the casinos, and I see the opposite. So, and I don't know, I haven't researched it. It's sort of my spirit, my observation, and I've been thinking about it for a few months. More questions? On that bright note. Yes.
Did Money come and play in the New World once, pretty much when he was down here? Do you know?
Did Muddy play in the New World?
Over here across the
at the new Roxy. I know he opened the new Roxy.
Right. We were doing some research on that, and that was kind of,
right.
Something we weren't able to. We found the new Roxy records in your book, but we were just kind of wondering,
The New World. I can't say for sure. It seems I'm confusing it with the list in here, and the talk about the clubs in here. So, which doesn't tie to Muddy. So I can't say for sure. If I didn't say it in the book, then I can't say for sure.
Can I? That question actually was. I'm the current owner of the new Roxy, and when I read the book, and I had wanted to know if there was a sourcing on that information about when he played. I know it was in the late fall, in the late 40s.
Yeah, if it's not in the back notes of the book, then I would have it on my computer, and I can get it to the sourcing for the new Roxy. Yeah.
Thanks.
I don't know. I always love to hear you talk about the soil. Hey, I've been thinking about this because it's because the weather's been so chilly. I mean, have you been afraid it's going to freeze after the 15th? Did you plant on the 15th? Is the 15th? The 15th is the day, right?
We would. This has been an unusually wet, cold spring. But as far as corn is concerned, you would plant corn early. It's been a little cool to plant cotton right now, and a lot of people would have a lot of their cotton planted right now if it hadn't been cool and wet.
Uh-huh.
So, I got a question for you.
Okay.
There is we basically got 18 counties in the Mississippi Delta.
Okay.
82, and the 18 counties in the Delta are impoverished, but my question is, what is the romance of the Delta?
Who?
I mean, why? We've got people that come to Clarksdale. I haven't really accepted this yet, and I've lived here all my life. Why do they come to Clarksdale? Clarksdale, Mississippi is known worldwide.
Yeah, exactly.
You mention Clarksdale, and
okay.
Somebody from anywhere will know where Clarksdale is. They won't know where Memphis is, but they'll know where Clarksdale is.
Okay.
But what is what is the draw?
Okay, so the question is, from a lifelong Clarksdalian, what's the word?
That's what.
Clarksdalian, Clarksdale resident. Why do people? What's the romance of the Delta, and why do people come here? And
see how many people. I know that 2 people are from here. Who all moved? Who all is visiting Clarksdale or moved here? In the audience.
What do you mean? Wait, visiting or moved? You mean lives here?
Who's not a native Clarksdalian.
Oh, not a native Clarksdalian, yeah. Okay, well, there's a sizable number. I mean, I've got to believe it's the music, it's the change that happened, and I think that change is more than the music, as you know, which is why all of these diversions we've been talking about today, you know, industry and gaming, and is all part of it, because it's more than just about the music. It's about what produced the music and what produced the change. And I think that this voice that was the voice of the underdog, in a way, the voice of the worker that was shunned and ignored or even quashed, that it could become this worldwide influence, meaning the blues becoming rock and roll and the former farmhands becoming international rock stars, basically. That cultural change is uplifting and says that, you know, that there's hope for the individual and there's hope for me, and people get that here. So, you know, that was a product of oppression. So you have this horrible civil conflict that produces this life-changing and world-changing art, and people want to see the fountain, you know, the source.
Well, I also think that the Delta is extremely unique. I mean, I've been all over, everywhere. There's no place like this. But it has to do a lot, I think, with guys like you that are getting the word out.
Huh. Well, thank you.
You know, because I wasn't aware of our blues heritage. I mean, I knew about juke joints and all that all my life from the time I was little, and I heard the music and I heard it, but until it actually got put in front of me, I didn't know it. I didn't know it.
But I mean, it's interesting. He's saying that as a resident here, basically couldn't see the forest for the trees. You couldn't appreciate what was going on around you. My first book about Memphis, you know, people said the same thing. And frankly, it goes on right now. What happened there, and in a way what's happening here, it's better than the casinos, but it's less than perfect, is that people see there's money in it. When Elvis died, Memphis changed because people from everywhere came there, and the city fathers who made fun of him one day said, wait a minute, let's not make fun, let's make money. And so it's been a slow change, and they don't get it. My friend Sebastian is here from France, a rider from France, and he was telling me on the ride down here that he's been brought over on this cultural for the Sax Museum and things like that, and to write about it when he gets back to France, and that there was talk of going to Wild Bill's in Memphis, a juke joint, on Saturday night, and then they'd taken everybody one night to see Memphis at the Orpheum, the Broadway play about the city, and now the next night they were going to go have a meeting with the producer or something, and it just seemed like, oh man, you know, you come all the way here, you really should go, you should take people to see the thing that is here and not in their home, you know, but, so they don't get it. You know, there's still this disconnect between the people in charge and the culture, but one, there always has been, and it survived because of that, I think. So that's not a bad thing. And two, it brings, people here. It distorts it. They don't understand it, but it brings people around. 1 second. Sebastian, can you address, having come from very far away, I'd like to hear the romance of the Delta.
About romanticism and tell you how I came to know about the blues and love the blues.
If you'll let me interrupt you periodically to say it through here for their podcast, then it'll be beneficial. Or yeah, you want?
It should pick up.
It should pick up.
As long as he speaks up, it should pick up. We're supposed to be.
Omni.
It will pick up. I'll speak loud. All the audience are loud and clear. Yeah. I'm originally from France, and I still live here. And even though I lived in Chicago for a few years, studying the blues. I learned about blues music through a program that was made on the equivalent of PBS in French by a guy who came to France on D-Day and traveled France with a truck, doing mostly propaganda for the Allied forces after D-Day. And he stayed in France and became a university professor. At the same time, he had a radio program, and every week he would program a mix of folk music. I mean, we had some Woody Guthrie, and we had some Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee, and some Robert Johnson, and Mahalia Jackson, and so on. And I heard that radio program when I was 7, and I fell in love with that music. And this has very much to do with your question. I think why we could relate to that is very much like what you said. This is the first time in the history of humanity when the culture of the proletariat, of the very poor people, became the general, universal culture. This is a unique phenomenon. It never happened before. Because for the first time before then, any cultural industry was a cultural industry for the elite, and not for the small people and the regular people. And blues and rock and roll and rock music was very different from that. It was the music of the little people, and it appealed to the little people all over the world. And for us, coming to America and coming to the Delta was getting close to that place that brought us that music in which we recognized ourselves. And as far as people from here not being aware of their own heritage, I think, it's already in the Bible. It says he's despised in his own land, and that's pretty much all over the place. It's the same. When you're too close, you just don't see and don't listen. That's
and I think to add to that, Pete, when you said, you've been all over and it's different here, it is the experience. I think that to me, this was the argument I made in my first book. The experience changes you. So when you learn blues from slabs of, inanimate black vinyl, that's one thing. But when you learn blues in the culture that the blues came from, that's another thing. And my first book was an argument basically, saying that the Rolling Stones did the first, and this obscure band from Memphis called Mudboy and the Neutrons did the second. And I liked their music more. But I like, not to disparage the Stones, but it's just the difference of being in the place. And so even if it's changed, the houses are gone, People are coming here in the 21st century and, listening to Pandora on their iPhones as they drive, and playing Muddy Waters as they drive past the place where Muddy Water couldn't listen to anything because he didn't have anything to listen on, or if he did, he wouldn't have had anything to make it work. There's no electricity. So that, but even doing that here, that far removed, yet being in the presence of that vast flat land, which, if you really know, it's had been an overgrown jungle, wasn't cleared until the early 1900s and into the 1900s. It was just a totally different place not long ago. but people can pick that up, I think. Hold on one second. Did you want to ask something? No. Okay. Well, you've asked one, so I'm going to ask the woman to your left and then you. Ladies first.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
I happen to be fourth generation Clarksdale
native. Fourth generation Clarksdale native.
Fourth generation, and it's home. It's I get warm and fuzzy. I lived, in other places, and I had the opportunity to go to school in southern Mississippi, and I visited so many other places. But it's just a story. It's a saga of triumph. It's my family came here because they were looking for opportunity. Of course, different things in history caused some of us to go in other places, but my mom stayed. My mom was the first in the family to get a college degree. To think about how far we've come in such a short amount of time. To think about, my great-grandmother being the offspring of a rape by a slave owner and being on the plantation. And, the more it has been an opportunity for me to find more about my history, about home, and about what makes me who I am. So being here in Clarksdale, I think everybody should think it's beautiful because I think it's beautiful. But in all honesty, though, I do believe that it's important for us to hear it from someone else, to hear other people, to say that they can see what we see. And as an educator, I try to make sure that my students have an opportunity to learn and to hear it over and over again that, yes, we're in the country, yes, we're in a rural area, yes, we may not have all the things that other places have, but we have something that's unique, something that's different, something that makes us one of a kind, and that we should take pride in that, and we should want to share that history and that heritage and want to continue to add to that story and make it a triumphant one, because there are some things that are negative, but we need to be a part of the positive and making a difference. So I think that growing up and now being able to investigate and find out more, it's just so interesting. Every time I pick up a book or every time I watch one of those videos that you were just talking about, it's just more interesting, and people want to come because most of the time when we love where we're from, you get to hear it in our voices and you can feel like you're at home too. So welcome everyone who's not from Clarksdale.
Well, it's a unique place, like you said. But
it's very unique. I love it here. I absolutely love it. And it's because I grew up here. But, it's funny. This is new land. This is a frontier, really. The Mississippi Delta is a frontier because it was a jungle, and the farm was founded in 1838. And most people that came to the Delta during that time came down the river, and they were doing one or two things, looking for fame and fortune, or running from somebody. And I'm sure it's about 50-50.
I got to make a book recommendation for anybody interested in the early Delta history. Trials of the Earth. Are you familiar with it? Yeah. Trials of the Earth is written by a woman whose husband was a lumberer and came here when it was, wilds of a jungle. Okay, here comes the name. I'm calling it to mind, and it is Mary Hamilton, Trials of the Earth. Recently republished by the University of Mississippi Press, and long out of print, and a great account of the trials of settling this land. And I mean, it's a real personal story, and I highly recommend it. Yes?
There's still quite a few members of the Hamilton family living on and or near the land that they settled, and here in town. So it's very personal as well as a history.
Wow. Holding that baby up when that water's rising. Oh my God, what a story.
Yeah, rocking chair on the log.
Rocking chair on the log, yeah. Unbelievable. Maybe one or two more questions and we'll wrap it up. Get yours in, okay?
I guess not a question so much as a response to the question about the romance of the Delta.
Good. Pete, you hit a hot one, man.
Yeah, you did. I get all autobiographical now, Pete. My name's John, by the way. But I grew up here, born and raised. never understood it, was ready to go. I mean, the first thing smoking, I'm ready to leave. I mean, this is just a backwater town, and I'm a kid, and I'm trying to go see the big bad world, right?
Memphis, Tennessee, was that the big draw?
Memphis is the capital of North Mississippi.
Yeah.
But aside from that, I got to Ohio, was where I ended up. And when I got to Ohio, the question I got the most was, tell me about Clarksville. Tell me about, like, look, I left that joint so far back so quick. Why is everybody asking me about Clarksville? And that's what it was. It's tell me about the music. And because musically, how do you do that? How do you take people who can't read, can't write, and become international stars? Politically, how do you be so downtrodden but then have all these elected officials? Economically, how does this work? You know, so they had all these different flavors on the question. But I'm beginning to think, well, maybe I am from somewhere. I mean, because I never thought that. I mean, I was leaving and I wasn't ever coming back. And I lived in Los Angeles for a while. More questions there. New York, more questions there. So I'm like an ambassador for Clarksville everywhere I go, right? And it clearly is not an intention to do so, right? But now later, I have an appreciation. But it's only because others had an appreciation and kept asking me to explain, justify, tell me the background, give me the history, you know, the political angle, the economic angle, the music angle, the relationship angle, the race angle. I mean, whatever the angle they had on their question. But I get it now. I mean, but when I was here, I just didn't.
But that is exactly the story of the blues itself. You know, the fact that you know, changed your opinion of this place that was this, you know, little backwater town, as you called it, and you realize, oh my God, there's great value in that. Look at what it did. That's the triumph of the, I think I say it in the Muddy Waters book, the triumph of the dirt farmer, right? It's like the guy who's got nothing proves to have a huge heart and a spirit that people want to embrace. Well, thank you so much for having me down here.
Because the Humanities was so generous in helping us fund this series and get our subject files organized, ultimately we're going to have them as part of the Mississippi Digital Library. And this podcast will be available on the Delta Blues Museum YouTube channel. But as a grant requirement, I'm going to have to ask y'all to please fill out evaluations. I'm going to start handing them out. If y'all want to continue the conversation, get books signed, thank you.
So there was a pop quiz. All right. Yeah, there's books in the lobby area. If you want to have them signed, I'm happy to inscribe them. Like I say, book signing makes my day. I love it. And I'm happy to take more questions for, you know, individually or as a group.
You did a good job.
Good job. Thank you.
Good explanation.
Yeah, help the museum get more funds, and also be sure to check out their archive here. You know, I mean, if you're doing local research or your kids are.
I'm sorry.
And for those of you who haven't been to the museum before, we recently added 7,300 square feet, which is what we're calling the Muddy Waters wing. And we also, just this week, were told that we are receiving a National Medal of Museum and Library Service.
National Medal of Museum and Library Services. And who's going to give this medal to you, Shelley?
Hopefully, the First Lady.
The First Lady will be giving a medal to Shelley, we hope. All right. Books are out of the front desk.